The twins' journey. Amara and Elias had always been different from the other children at the orphanage. While the others played games or quarreled over toys, the twins spent hours in the quiet corners of the old, drafty building, whispering about their dreams of a better life. They were bound by a promise they'd made to each other when they were only 8 years old: no matter what happens, we stick together. The orphanage itself was a somber place, located at the edge of a small, forgotten town. The walls were painted a dull beige, peeling in places, and the windows were streaked with grime. The air always seemed damp, carrying the faint smell of mildew mixed with overcooked porridge. The caretakers were kind but overworked, and resources were stretched thin. Amara, with her fiery red hair and a face dusted with freckles, had a boundless imagination. She carried a small sketchbook everywhere she went, its pages filled with drawings of houses she dreamed of living in, families she imagined calling her own, and worlds far beyond the orphanage walls. One day, she often said to Elias, "We'll have a home with a big garden, a dog, and maybe even a treehouse. You'll see." Elias, the older twin by 7 minutes, was her opposite in many ways. Quiet and observant, he always thought 3 steps ahead. His brown hair was perpetually messy, and his dark eyes carried a seriousness that made him seem older than his years. While Amara dreamed, Elias planned. He saved every coin they earned from odd jobs, stashing them in a tin box hidden beneath a loose floorboard in their shared room. For emergencies, he'd say whenever Amara asked what the money was for. Their lives were a routine of school, chores, and trying to stay out of trouble. But as their 16th birthday approached, a sense of dread began to creep in. In 2 years, they would age out of the orphanage system. "We'll figure it out," Elias assured Amara one evening as they sat by the window, watching the rain fall in sheets. "We always do." But deep down, even he wasn't sure how they'd manage. The annual charity gala hosted by the orphanage was the one event where the twins were forced to interact with the outside world. It was a grand affair, attended by wealthy donors who wanted to feel good about their contributions to society. The children were given the task of serving hors d'oeuvres, cleaning up after the guests, and generally staying out of the way. Amara hated the gala. She found it humiliating to stand in her ill-fitting dress, smiling politely at people who barely acknowledged her presence. "They look at us like we're invisible," she whispered to Elias as they waited in the kitchen, trays in hand. "Better invisible than pitted," Elias replied, adjusting the collar of his shirt, which was a size too small. This year's gala was held in the town's grandest venue, a historic ballroom with crystal chandeliers and marble floors. Amara couldn't help but be awed by the sheer opulence of it all. "Imagine living in a house like this," she mused, her eyes wide. Elias rolled his eyes but couldn't suppress a small smile. "You'd have it filled with art supplies in a week." As the evening wore on, the twins moved through the crowd, balancing trays laden with glasses of sparkling cider. Amara was distracted, her eyes darting around the room, taking in the elegantly dressed guests. That's when she saw him, a tall man with salt and pepper hair and a commanding presence. His suit was perfectly tailored, and his watch glinted under the chandelier light. There was something about him that caught her attention. She couldn't explain it, but he seemed familiar. "Amara," Elias hissed, nudging her with his elbow. "Stop staring. You're going to spill something." But Amara couldn't look away. The man's piercing green eyes scanned the room, and for a brief moment, they locked with hers. She felt a strange sensation, like a memory just out of reach. Shaking it off, she focused on her task, determined not to embarrass herself. The moment Amara approached the man's table, her nerves got the better of her. As she bent to offer him a glass of cider, her hand trembled, and the glass tipped over, spilling its contents onto his lap. "I'm so sorry," she exclaimed, her face turning crimson. The man stood quickly, brushing at his suit. "It's all right," he said, his voice calm and reassuring. "No harm done." Elias appeared at her side almost instantly, his protective instincts kicking in. "She didn't mean to, sir. We'll get you a towel." But the man wasn't angry. In fact, he seemed oddly interested in them. His eyes lingered on Amara, then shifted to Elias. For a moment, he looked as if he wanted to say something but thought better of it. As the twins hurried away, Amara couldn't shake the feeling that the man had recognized them. "Did you see how he looked at us?" she whispered to Elias once they were back in the kitchen. "He probably thinks we're clumsy," Elias muttered, trying to dismiss the incident. But Amara wasn't convinced. Something about the man's expression had unsettled her, and she couldn't stop wondering who he was and why he seemed so familiar. Unbeknownst to the twins, the man, Thomas Rowland, was equally unsettled. After they left, he reached into his wallet and pulled out an old, faded photograph. It was one he had carried for years, though he never fully understood why. The photo showed two babies in the arms of a young woman with fiery red hair. Written on the back were the words, "Amara and Elias, together always." Thomas's hands trembled as he stared at the photo, then glanced in the direction the twins had gone. Could it really be them? Something inside him stirred, a mixture of hope, guilt, and the weight of long-buried secrets. He knew he had to find out the truth. A chance encounter. The morning after the gala, Thomas Rowland couldn't shake the image of the twins from his mind. Sleep had evaded him, his thoughts consumed by the uncanny resemblance between the teenagers and the two babies in the worn photograph he kept hidden in his wallet. The photograph wasn't just a memento, it was a link to a chapter of his past that had remained unresolved. The young woman in the picture, Lily, had been his closest friend during his early years when he was just starting out in business. She was the kind of person who saw beauty in everything, even when life was harsh. Thomas had admired her resilience and compassion, traits that stood in stark contrast to the cutthroat world he was navigating. But Lily had disappeared without a trace after a brief letter saying she needed a fresh start. For years, Thomas had tried to find her, but every lead turned into a dead end. He eventually gave up the search, though guilt lingered like a shadow over his successes. He had often wondered what had become of her. And now, two teenagers with the same fiery red hair and sharp brown eyes as Lily had appeared out of nowhere. Coincidence? Thomas didn't believe in coincidences. Determined to uncover the truth, Thomas placed a call to the orphanage early the next morning. "Mrs. Callahan," he said when the director answered, "this is Thomas Rowland. I had the pleasure of attending your gala last night. I'd like to meet with you to discuss a potential donation, and a matter of personal interest." Mrs. Callahan, ever eager to secure support for the struggling orphanage, readily agreed. That afternoon, Thomas arrived at the orphanage, his black luxury sedan standing out against the modest surroundings. The children, curious about the elegant stranger, peeked out from behind windows and doorways. Mrs. Callahan greeted him warmly. "Mr. Rowland, what a pleasure to see you again. Thank you for your generosity last night." Thomas offered a polite smile. "The pleasure was mine. You're doing important work here." As they walked through the orphanage, Thomas's eyes scanned the rooms, taking in the faded wallpaper, worn furniture, and the hopeful yet cautious faces of the children. "I was particularly struck by two of your teenagers," he said casually. "Amara and Elias, I believe their names are." Mrs. Callahan's expression softened. "Ah, yes. They're remarkable kids, bright, resourceful, and incredibly close. They've been here since they were toddlers. Tragic story, really. Their parents died in a car accident when they were just infants. No relatives ever came forward." Thomas's heart skipped a beat. The pieces of the puzzle were starting to fit, but he needed more information. "Do you know anything about their mother?" he asked, his voice carefully neutral. "Not much, I'm afraid. Her name was Lily, I believe. She was an artist, from what little I've gathered." The accident was sudden, and it left the children with nothing. Thomas's grip tightened around the photograph in his pocket. It was her. It had to be. Later that afternoon, Mrs. Callahan arranged for Thomas to meet the twins in a quiet room at the back of the orphanage. Amara and Elias entered cautiously, their expressions wary. They were used to adults making promises they couldn't keep. Thomas stood, offering a warm smile. "Thank you for taking the time to meet with me. I promise I won't keep you long." Elias crossed his arms, his protective stance unmistakable. "What's this about?" Thomas reached into his wallet and pulled out the photograph, placing it on the table between them. "I found this photo years ago," he said softly. "Is this you?" Amara's breath caught in her throat as she stared at the image. Her hands trembled as she picked up the photograph. This is us," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "But how do you have it?" Elias's eyes narrowed. "Where did you get that?" Thomas took a deep breath. "I knew your mother," he admitted. "We were close friends a long time ago. I've been looking for her for years, but I never knew she had children." The twins exchanged a glance, their emotions a whirlwind of confusion, hope, and suspicion. "Why now?" Elias demanded. "Why are you here after all this time?" "I didn't know you existed until last night," Thomas said honestly. "But now that I do, I want to help. I want to learn more about your mother, and about you." Amara's voice trembled as she asked the question that had haunted them for years. "Do you know why no one came for us? Why we were left here?" Thomas's heart ached at the pain in her voice. "I don't have all the answers," he admitted, "but I promise I'll help you find them." Elias's protective instincts flared. "We've heard promises before," he said bitterly. "They never mean anything." "I understand your doubt," Thomas said gently. "But I'm not here to make empty promises. I want to know you, to be there for you in whatever way you'll let me." Amara's eyes filled with tears, but she held her head high. "Why would you care about us? We're just two kids no one wanted." Thomas's voice was firm but compassionate. "You matter. And I think your mother would want me to be here for you now." The room fell into a heavy silence, the weight of years of abandonment and longing hanging in the air. As Thomas left the orphanage that day, he knew this was only the beginning. The twins had every reason to be cautious, and he respected that. But he was determined to earn their trust and uncover the truth about Lily's life, and her untimely death. For Amara and Elias, hope was a fragile thing, but something about Thomas stirred a flicker of possibility. Little did they know, this meeting would set them on a path filled with revelations, healing, and a bond that neither time nor tragedy could break. The revelation. The winter wind howled through the orphanage grounds as Amara and Elias sat on the creaky wooden bench near the edge of the garden. The sky was heavy with gray clouds, mirroring the weight of the questions swirling in their minds. The meeting with Thomas Rowland had left them shaken. "He can't be for real," Elias said, his voice low but firm. "Rich people don't just show up out of nowhere wanting to help kids like us." Amara hugged her knees to her chest, her sketchbook lying forgotten on the bench beside her. "But what if he's telling the truth?" she whispered. "What if he really did know Mom?" Elias sighed, raking a hand through his messy hair. "Even if he did, why would that matter now? She's gone, Amara. Nothing's going to change that." "I know," Amara said softly. "But don't you want to know more about her? About where we came from?" Elias didn't respond, but Amara could see the conflict in his eyes. Their mother had always been a shadowy figure in their lives, a presence they longed for but barely remembered. The next day, Thomas returned to the orphanage, his expression serious but hopeful. Mrs. Callahan ushered him into her office, where the twins were waiting. "Thank you for agreeing to meet me again," Thomas said, his voice warm. Elias leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. We're here. Say what you need to say. Thomas appreciated the boy's protective nature. He could see the weight of responsibility Elias carried for his sister. I understand your skepticism, Thomas began. But I'm here because I believe your mother was someone very important to me. And if there's even a chance I can help you learn more about her, I want to try. He placed a small envelope on the table. This is a letter your mother wrote to me years ago. It's the last thing I ever received from her. Amara's eyes widened as she reached for the envelope, her fingers trembling. The paper was yellowed with age, the ink faded but still legible. She unfolded it carefully, her breath hitching as she read aloud. Dear Thomas. Life is taking me in a direction I didn't expect. I've made some mistakes, but I have to find a way to move forward for the sake of my children. You were always a steady presence in my life, and I'll never forget that. Maybe one day our paths will cross again. Until then, take care of yourself. Lily. Tears welled up in Amara's eyes. She mentioned us, she whispered. She wanted to do better for us. Elias, though visibly moved, kept his voice steady. Why didn't you come looking for her sooner? Thomas's expression darkened with regret. I tried, he admitted. But she disappeared without a trace. I hired investigators, made calls, followed every lead, but it was like she vanished off the face of the earth. Eventually, I had to accept that I might never find her. Amara's voice quivered. Do you think she was running from something? Thomas nodded slowly. It's possible. But whatever it was, she loved you. That much is clear. Over the next few weeks, Thomas made regular visits to the orphanage, sharing stories about Lily and learning more about the twins. He discovered that Amara had a talent for art and dreams of becoming a professional illustrator. Elias, practical and driven, wanted to start a business someday. One chilly afternoon, Thomas invited them to lunch at a cozy cafe in town. The twins hesitated but eventually agreed. As they sat by the window, the smell of fresh bread and coffee filling the air, Thomas leaned forward. There's something else I need to tell you, he said carefully. I've been doing some digging into your mother's past, and I found something unexpected. Amara and Elias exchanged wary glances. What is it? Elias asked. Thomas pulled out a folder and slid it across the table. Inside were documents, newspaper clippings, and photographs. Your mother was an incredible artist, Thomas said. She had exhibitions in several galleries before you were born. But after a financial scandal involving her business partner, her reputation was ruined. She was left with nothing. Amara's eyes widened as she flipped through the documents. She was famous? In the art world, yes, Thomas confirmed. But she never recovered from the betrayal. That might be why she chose to disappear. Elias frowned. So she was running from debt and humiliation? Possibly, Thomas admitted. But that doesn't define who she was. She was strong, creative, and resilient, just like you too. Amara's voice was soft. Do you think she wanted to come back for us? I believe she did, Thomas said firmly. But sometimes life throws challenges at us that we can't overcome alone. The conversation left the twins with more questions than answers, but a fragile bond was forming between them and Thomas. For the first time in years, they felt seen, valued, and connected to a part of their past that had always been a mystery. As they walked back to the orphanage that evening, Amara looked up at Elias. Maybe this is our chance, she said. To learn more about Mom and maybe even have a future with Thomas. Elias's expression was thoughtful. I'm not ready to trust him completely, he admitted. But if he's willing to help us, maybe we should give him a chance. Amara smiled faintly. Mom always said we were stronger together, right? Elias nodded. Together always. Neither of them knew what lay ahead, but one thing was certain. Thomas Rowland was determined to be a part of their journey. And for the first time in years, the twins allowed themselves to hope. The road to truth. The winter chill lingered as Amara and Elias stood by the iron gates of the orphanage. Thomas Rowland's sleek black car idled nearby, its engine humming softly. He had offered to take them to the city, where he had arranged a meeting with someone who might shed more light on their mother's mysterious past. "Are we really doing this?" Elias asked, his breath visible in the frosty air. Amara nodded, her eyes resolute. "If we want answers, we have to." Elias sighed but opened the car door. "Fine. But if this goes sideways, we're out." Thomas smiled warmly as they settled into the leather seats. "I appreciate your trust, even if it's cautious," he said. "We're going to meet an old friend of your mother's, a gallery owner named Margaret Finch. She knew Lily well before everything happened." The twins exchanged a glance, curiosity mingling with apprehension. The city was a world apart from the sleepy town where the orphanage stood. Skyscrapers gleamed in the winter sunlight, and the streets buzzed with life. Amara pressed her face to the window, taking in the sights. "It's beautiful," she murmured. Elias remained guarded. "It's just a city," he muttered. Thomas pulled up in front of an elegant art gallery with large glass windows displaying vibrant paintings. The sign above the entrance read Margaret Finch Gallery. "Ready?" Thomas asked. Amara nodded eagerly, while Elias gave a reluctant shrug. Inside, the gallery was warm and inviting, the walls adorned with a stunning collection of artwork. A graceful woman with silver-streaked hair and a stylish scarf approached them, her eyes lighting up when she saw Thomas. "Thomas Rowland." "It's been ages," she greeted, embracing him warmly. "Margaret, it's good to see you," Thomas said. "These are Amara and Elias." Margaret's gaze softened as she looked at the twins. "Lily's children," she said softly. "You have her eyes." Amara's heart raced. "You knew our mom?" "I did," Margaret confirmed. "She was one of the most talented artists I ever met. Her work had a soul to it, like she poured every part of herself onto the canvas." Elias's voice was steady but curious. "What happened to her?" Margaret's expression grew somber. "Lily trusted the wrong person. Her business partner, a man named Victor Hayes, embezzled funds from their joint venture and framed her for the financial disaster. She lost everything, her reputation, her clients, even her home." Thomas's jaw tightened. "I remember hearing about Victor Hayes. He vanished after the scandal." Margaret nodded. "Lily tried to rebuild her life, but the art world is unforgiving. She disappeared shortly after that, and I never heard from her again." Amara's voice trembled. "Did she ever talk about us?" Margaret's eyes filled with compassion. "All the time. You were her world. She carried sketches of you everywhere, said they were her most precious creations." Tears prickled Amara's eyes. For so long, she had wondered if their mother had truly loved them. Now she knew. As they left the gallery, Thomas's expression was thoughtful. "Victor Hayes," he murmured. "That name keeps coming up. If we want to uncover the full truth, we need to find him." Elias frowned. "Do you really think he's still out there?" "People like Hayes don't disappear forever," Thomas said grimly. "They resurface when they think the world has forgotten their sins." Amara's voice was firm. "Then we find him." Thomas admired her determination. "We'll start by reaching out to some contacts of mine. If Hayes is still involved in the art world, someone will know." The following days were a whirlwind of research and phone calls. Thomas's connections proved invaluable, and it wasn't long before they tracked down a lead. Victor Hayes was rumored to be living under an alias in a coastal town, running an upscale art consultancy. "This is it," Thomas said as they gathered in his office. "If we confront him, we might finally get the answers you deserve. Elias crossed his arms. And what if he denies everything? Then we'll make sure the truth comes to light, Thomas promised. Amara's eyes blazed with determination. He ruined our mother's life. He doesn't get to walk away from that. The trip to the coastal town was tense but filled with purpose. The salty breeze carried the scent of the ocean as they approached a sleek building with glass walls overlooking the water. Inside, Victor Hayes was holding court with a group of clients, his charm evident even from a distance. His hair was silver but styled meticulously, and his tailored suit spoke of wealth and success. Thomas led the way, his presence commanding attention. "Victor Hayes," he called out, his voice firm. Hayes turned, his smile faltering when he saw Thomas. "Thomas Rowland. To what do I owe this, surprise? You remember Lily Harper?" Thomas asked coldly. Hayes's expression shifted, a flicker of guilt crossing his face before he masked it with indifference. "That was a long time ago. Ancient history." "Not for her children," Thomas said, stepping aside to reveal Amara and Elias. Hayes's eyes widened. "You're her kids," Elias finished, his voice hard. "And we want the truth." Hayes sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Look, I made mistakes. But I paid for them." "Did you?" Amara challenged. "Because our mother paid for them with her reputation and her life." Hayes's facade cracked. "I didn't mean for things to go that far," he admitted. "I was desperate, and I panicked. I never thought it would destroy her." "You can't undo the past," Thomas said, his voice steely. "But you can help set the record straight." Hayes hesitated, then nodded. "I'll testify. I'll sign whatever you need to clear her name." Amara's heart pounded. "Why now?" "Because I'm tired of running," Hayes admitted. "And because it's the right thing to do." With Hayes's confession in hand, Thomas wasted no time contacting legal experts to clear Lily's name posthumously. News of the truth spread quickly, and Margaret Finch arranged a special exhibition to honor Lily's work, ensuring that her legacy was restored. As Amara and Elias stood in the gallery, surrounded by their mother's vibrant paintings, a sense of peace washed over them. "She would have loved this," Amara said softly. Elias nodded. "And she would have been proud of us." Thomas placed a hand on their shoulders. "You've been through so much, but this is just the beginning. You have a future filled with possibilities." Amara smiled through her tears. "Together," she said. Elias echoed the sentiment. "Always. Healing the wounds of the past." The gallery was filled with the soft hum of admiration as visitors wandered through the halls, gazing at Lily Harper's breathtaking art. The vibrant paintings, once hidden from the world, now stood as a testament to her resilience and creativity. Amara and Elias stood near the centerpiece, a large canvas bursting with vivid hues that seemed to capture the very essence of hope. "She painted this right before everything fell apart," Margaret Finch explained, joining them. "It was meant to be part of a collection called Dreamscapes. Sadly, the collection was never shown, until now." Amara traced the swirling patterns with her eyes, feeling an unspoken connection to the woman who had poured her soul onto the canvas. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "It's more than that," Margaret said gently. "It's her legacy. And now, thanks to you, the world gets to see it." Elias's voice was steady but thoughtful. "It feels like we've finally given her a voice again." Margaret nodded. "Exactly. And I think she would be incredibly proud of both of you." As the exhibition continued, Thomas Rowland observed the twins from across the room. Their journey had been anything but easy, but he marveled at their strength and determination. He had come into their lives as a stranger, driven by guilt and the need for closure, but now he felt a deep bond with them. "You've done something remarkable, Thomas," Margaret said as she joined him. "Bringing those kids here, helping them uncover the truth. It's a gift they'll carry forever. Thomas's gaze softened. They've given me just as much, if not more. They reminded me of what truly matters. Margaret smiled knowingly. Family has a way of doing that. Later that evening, after the gallery had emptied, Thomas invited the twins to his estate for dinner. The sprawling mansion was warm and welcoming, filled with the scent of freshly baked bread and hearty stew. "I hope you're hungry," Thomas said as they entered the dining room. "My chef went all out tonight." Amara's eyes widened at the lavish spread. "This is a lot," she said with a nervous laugh. Elias remained cautious. "We're not used to fancy stuff." Thomas chuckled. "Well, tonight you are. But no pressure, eat as much or as little as you like." As they settled around the table, the conversation flowed naturally. Thomas shared stories from his early days in business, while Amara talked about her passion for art and Elias revealed his entrepreneurial dreams. "You're both incredibly talented," Thomas said genuinely. "I have no doubt you'll achieve great things." Amara hesitated before speaking. "It's strange, you know. For so long, we felt invisible. Like no one cared. And now, everything's changed." Thomas's expression grew serious. "You were never invisible, Amara. Your mother saw you, and now so do I." Elias, ever protective, leaned forward. "What happens next? Are you just going to disappear like everyone else?" Thomas met his gaze firmly. "No. I'm here for the long haul, if you'll have me." The weight of his words hung in the air. For two kids who had known nothing but abandonment, the promise of stability was almost too much to believe. Amara's voice was soft but resolute. "We want that too." Elias nodded slowly. "Yeah. Maybe it's time we stop running from good things." In the following weeks, life began to take on a new rhythm. The twins moved into a guest house on Thomas's estate, where they had the space and resources to pursue their dreams. Amara enrolled in an esteemed art program, while Elias began working with Thomas's business team, soaking up knowledge like a sponge. But the transition wasn't without its challenges. The scars of their past lingered, and trust was something that had to be earned every day. One afternoon, as Thomas and Elias reviewed financial reports in the study, Elias spoke up unexpectedly. "Why did you really do all this?" Thomas set down his pen, meeting the boy's intense gaze. "Because I failed your mother," he admitted. "I couldn't be there for her when she needed me most. But I can be here for you now." Elias's jaw tightened. It's hard to believe someone would do that without wanting something in return. "I understand," Thomas said gently. "But I'm not looking for anything. I just want to see you both thrive." Elias exhaled slowly. "I guess I'm still figuring out how to trust that." Thomas nodded. "Take your time. I'm not going anywhere." Meanwhile, Amara's art blossomed in ways she had never imagined. Her professors praised her unique style, and her work began gaining attention in local galleries. One evening, as she worked on a new piece in her studio, Thomas stopped by. "That's stunning," he said, admiring the bold strokes and intricate details. "Thanks," Amara said, wiping paint from her hands. "It feels like I'm finally finding my voice." "You always had it," Thomas said warmly. "You just needed the right space to let it out." Amara smiled. "I think Mom would have liked this one." "I'm sure she would," Thomas agreed. "She's probably cheering you on right now." As the months passed, the bond between Thomas and the twins deepened. They celebrated milestones together, from Amara's first gallery showing to Elias landing his first major business deal. One sunny afternoon, as they gathered for a picnic on the estate grounds, Amara looked around at the laughter and warmth surrounding them. "We've come a long way, haven't we?" she said to Elias. "Yeah," he agreed. And for once, it feels like we're exactly where we're supposed to be. Thomas raised his glass in a toast. To new beginnings, and to family. The twins clinked their glasses with his, their hearts full of gratitude and hope. They had found their way through loss and hardship, and now they stood on the threshold of a future filled with endless possibilities. A future rewritten. The sun dipped low over Thomas Rowland's sprawling estate, casting golden hues across the manicured gardens. Birds chirped in the distance as a gentle breeze rustled the trees. Amara and Elias sat on a blanket spread across the soft grass, their laughter blending harmoniously with the serene ambience. The past year had been a whirlwind, a journey from uncertainty and loss to healing and newfound purpose. The twins had not only uncovered the truth about their mother's past but also carved out their own futures, supported by Thomas's unwavering presence. "Remember when we thought this was all too good to be true?" Amara asked, sketching lazy lines on her notepad. Elias grinned, leaning back on his hands. "Yeah, I was sure Thomas was some kind of scam artist." "I don't blame you," Thomas chimed in as he approached with a tray of lemonade. "Skepticism is a survival skill." Elias smirked. "Well, I guess you passed the test." Thomas set the tray down and joined them on the blanket. "Glad to hear it." He took a sip of lemonade and looked at the twins thoughtfully. "You've both come so far. Your mom would be proud." Amara's voice softened. "We couldn't have done it without you." Thomas shook his head. "You had it in you all along. I just gave you a nudge." The exhibition honoring Lily Harper's work had been a resounding success. Art critics hailed her as a visionary whose talent had been unjustly overlooked. Amara had even been invited to curate a permanent collection of her mother's paintings at the prestigious Margaret Finch Gallery. Standing in the gallery on opening night, surrounded by reporters and admirers, Amara had felt a surge of pride. This was not just a tribute to her mother, it was a reclamation of her legacy. Elias, ever practical, had taken charge of managing the financial aspects of their mother's revived estate. With Thomas as his mentor, he had learned the intricacies of business and negotiation, earning respect for his sharp mind and determination. But beyond their individual successes, what mattered most was the bond they had forged with each other. And with Thomas. One evening, as they gathered for dinner in the grand dining room, Thomas made an unexpected announcement. "I've been thinking," he began, "about the future." Elias raised an eyebrow. "You're not retiring, are you?" Thomas chuckled. "Not yet. But I've built a lot over the years, and I want to make sure it goes to the right people." Amara set down her fork, sensing the gravity of his words. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I want you both to be a part of it," Thomas said earnestly. "Not just as beneficiaries, but as partners. I want you to help shape the future of my ventures." Elias blinked in surprise. "You're serious?" "Very," Thomas confirmed. "You've proven yourselves time and again. And more importantly, you've become family." Amara's heart swelled with emotion. "We never expected this," she said softly. "You don't have to decide right away," Thomas assured them. "Just know that the door is open." Elias's expression was thoughtful. "We'll think about it," he said, his voice steady. Amara smiled. "Thank you, Thomas. For everything." As the weeks turned into months, the twins embraced their new roles with enthusiasm. Amara continued to thrive as an artist, her work gaining international recognition. Her mother's story had become a source of inspiration for countless others who had faced adversity. Elias, meanwhile, spearheaded innovative projects within Thomas's business empire, driven by a desire to create opportunities for others. His natural leadership skills flourished, and he quickly became a respected figure in the business world. But their journey wasn't just about professional success, it was about healing and growth. One sunny afternoon, they returned to the orphanage to visit Mrs. Callahan, who greeted them with open arms. "You two look wonderful," she said warmly. Life's been good to you, hasn't it? It has, Amara agreed. Thanks to people like you who never gave up on us. Mrs. Callahan beamed. I always knew you were destined for great things. Elias glanced around the familiar grounds. It feels different now. Lighter. That's because you found your place in the world, Mrs. Callahan said gently. And that's what every child deserves. As they walked back to the car, Amara looked up at Elias. Do you ever think about how far we've come? Every day, Elias said. And I'm grateful for all of it, the good and the bad. Amara nodded. Me too. And I think Mom would be happy knowing we found our way. Elias's voice was firm. She'd be proud. Thomas, waiting by the car, smiled as they approached. Ready to head back? Yeah, Elias said with a grin. But we'll be back again soon. Of course, Thomas said. This place will always be a part of you. Amara glanced at the horizon, where the sun was beginning to set. It feels like a new chapter, doesn't it? Definitely, Elias agreed. Thomas opened the car door for them. Let's make it a great one. As they drove away, the past no longer felt like a weight but a foundation on which to build their future. They had faced heartache and uncertainty but emerged stronger, wiser, and united. Their mother's love had guided them through the darkest of times, and now they carried her legacy forward, with hope, purpose, and the unbreakable bond of family.